Hello, my name is Patrick Daniels, and welcome to the Mining and Rollo Jamison Museum Heritage Days, virtually. I got interested in the music collection here at the museum because of my dad. He was the first president of the Jamison Museum Association and helped move the collection from B-Town over to Platteville. I was 11 when the collection was moved over here, so at that time it was like, look but don't touch. But over the years, he gradually let me take over some of the demonstrations of the different musical instruments that we have here, and so then that's what I've been doing since basically 1988 was the first year that I did it by myself. You kind of can break them down into the three different mechanical music types. You have your music boxes, the traditional music boxes that have some sort of a metal musical cone in them. And you have the reed organs, which are also called organettes. And then you also have the acoustic era with the Edisons and the Victor talking machines, which are also called Victrolas. And the primary example here is a Brunswick, which came on a little bit later, but their kind of slogan is that they can play any record. So whether it's the Edison technology or the Victor records. So that's kind of the collection in a nutshell. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each one of those groups individually. So starting with the music boxes, basically in the 1700s or so, based on carillons of the 1600s, they miniaturized those into what's commonly referred to as a music box. And this is an example of a music box, and in it you can see the musical comb, and there's little pins on a cylinder in there that strike the teeth on the musical comb, and that's what produces whatever note is it, and based on where that cylinder is, it over time it creates a melody, and this particular unit has 6 different tunes on it, and the tips of the musical comb are very, very narrow, and what happens is that you can shift at the end of a song to just slightly over the whole cylinder to play the next song. And so basically one rotation is one song, and that's around not quite a minute. And these were fine, and it's really good to have some sort of a musical melody that you can give to other people, and that's kind of the idea of this. It's going to be the same music that somebody else is listening to as well. Whereas if you give somebody an instrument, they have to learn how to play it. So this is a way to get music without knowing how to play music. So you started out with cylinder music boxes, and they had interchangeable cylinders, but those were definitely big and bulky, and the pins on them were prone to breaking off, and so there's a lot of issues with them. So the Symphonium company in 1885 came out with the first interchangeable disc music box, and here's an example of one of those. It plays a 7-inch disc, and the Imperial Symphonium was patented in 1885, by the Symphonium Company in Leipzig, Germany. Actually, they're just outside of that, and there's basically two brothers that founded it. Actually, shortly after founding the Music Box company, there was a foreman and another employee. 4 years after it, they decided that they could do a better job at creating a better music box. So they created the Polyphon company, branched out on their own in 1890. And then in 1890 also there was a tariff act of the U.S. Congress, and so they couldn't really sell them in the U.S. So they created a subsidiary company called the Regina Corporation, or the Regina Music Box Company is the name of it. And they started making music boxes in the U.S. in 1893, 94. Here is an example of one of their primary sellers of the large music boxes. All three of those companies, the Symphonium, Polyphon, and Regina, all made various sizes of music boxes. One of the most popular sizes was the one that has the 15.5 tune sheets. And so this is kind of what you would consider a high-end fidelity system for back in 2000 or 1900. These were made from about 1897 to really until the end of the company in 1923, before they went bankrupt. The heyday of this one was about 1900 and 1905, really kind of before the phonographs and gramophones, Victrolas, if you will. They kind of took over the music industry. But this Regina has a piano-style soundboard in the back, and a double comb. So there's a tumbler in there that each one of these discs has perforations in it, but the perforations aren't really to produce a sound. They're to create a tab on the back side of it, and that tab hits against the tumbler, and the tumbler then plucks both the front and the back musical comb at the teeth on there at the same time to give a richer, fuller sound. So those are kind of the two big improvements over that make this unit or this instrument a lot more musically pleasant than something like the Imperial Symphonium, this small, one comb instrument. It's got a box to at least amplify the sound a little bit, but not anywhere near the quality of the Regina, which in 1900 it sold new for $175, and each one of the tune sheets was 60 cents a piece, which in today's terminology that would be like $5,000–6,000 for the unit, and then I don't know, $10–20 for each one of the tune sheets, which is actually pretty similar to a high-end fidelity system, or a home stereo system, if you will, in today's market. One of the interesting things about this is that these perforations reminded Rollo of the IBM punch cards. That's obviously old technology too, but for a mainframe of some sort. And he was saying that it's basically the same as digitization, is digital imprinting of that information onto a medium. So So it's like kind of like nothing new is there's nothing new under the sun. You're just like the Bible says too. So that was one of Rollo's kind of things about technology. Technology repeats itself over and over in new and interesting variations to it. So Rollo got this particular instrument from a Mrs. Roberts, and Mrs. Roberts passed away in 1942, so he had to have gotten it fairly early in the collecting phase, and he says that Mrs. Roberts told him that she got it as an anniversary present from Mr. Roberts, so it sat many years in his tavern, the Spring Valley Tavern in B-Town, which is where he operated for many years, people would play the music box in the tavern and stuff like that. So it's not in pristine condition, but it is playable, and it is a pretty interesting piece. Anyway, I guess we can try to take a listen to this. When it was new, it would go through all 12 tune sheets on one winding. And I also like to play music that's patriotic, because the Heritage Day has historically been on July 4th. Rollo was definitely a very patriotic person, and was very supportive of the troops, and actually during World War II he led a Grant County writing campaign to the men in service across the seas too. And so you can see it's switching the song or the tunes. But nice little waltz. This particular unit has a curved glass front. You could get an art tin on the front too, but most people wanted to see the inner working. So the glass one pretty much was far and away sold out. The other one. And this is an oak cabinet, and they also made a mahogany cabinet. And then they also had an attachment that went up here on the crown. It's called the corona, so that's why you have a crown up at the top. But they had a clock that would go in there so that you could play a tune or on the quarter hour, every hour, or play all 12. So today, right now, what I'm going to be talking about is organets. And these were mechanical music that was basically invented in the 1870s or so, as a way to produce a sound like a reed organ, but in a smaller size, obviously more cost effective, and in a way that you don't have to have any musical talent whatsoever to play. So some of the earlier examples are like this Angelica organet, which would have been made in the 1880s or between 1880s and 19 teens or whatever. and this is, they're using what is called a paper as a valve function, where you can maybe see in there's openings in this paper, and there's a bellows underneath that creates a vacuum in the sound chamber. And when there's an opening, it draws the air in past the reed, which vibrates the reed, which makes the sound. So this is what it sounds like. So that was called Soldier's Joy, and it was written basically after the Civil War, about substance abuse, and particularly the increased availability of morphine and you know, the drugs that were available, because that was, the Civil War was really a kind of that founding use of you know, those drugs for pain relief, and so this this paper is 23 feet long, and each one of the and there's multiple tunes on the same piece of paper, but they sold them by the foot, and so if you wanted your favorite songs, they may have created a little bit longer one, because those are more popular selling. So 23 feet is like kind of the standard one that comes with it, and then, you know, 20 or 27 foot or 30 foot are ones that, you know, that you have more popular tunes on them. And I'll just point out here that this unit would have originally had what they call a buffalo leather covering on the outside, but you can see it's basically all you can see is remnants of the glue on the outside, and they would have had like some sort of a placard on the inside describing the operations of the Angelica. But that buffalo leather is pretty common for you know, smaller fixtures. You can see it actually the same sort of thing here, that leatherette material, and it's called buffalo leather because they were manufactured or stamped in that motif in Buffalo, New York, is where most of the tanneries were, and they stamped them like that so that you didn't see the imperfections in the leather as much, so it made a more uniform look to it. And so a lot of the things that Rollo got may have not been in the best shape. He might have gotten it from the dump or something like that, and so he would have fixed it up. And like this one was missing the rewind key, so he took a piece of copper tubing and bent it into a shape that fits on here to rewind it. So all you need to do to rewind it is press down on the inside and then wind backwards to get to the start of your song, and then you're rewound it before the song. So yeah, this needs a little bit of work. There's a couple of the reeds in there that need to be worked on yet, but other than that, you know, really hasn't had that much work done to it, and 100 years old plus, and it's still working fine. So, and even the paper on it is like an acid-free paper, so yeah, it is a little bit cracked up, but this is definitely the original paper for it. So another example of an organette, it might be a little bit more common. I know that we just received a donation from Dr. Hill for a gem roller organ, and it's basically the same thing as a concert roller organ, but it's the smaller, cheaper version of it, which sold a lot more, like 10 gems or roller organs to maybe one concert roller organ, if not even more so. And so the way this one operates is you have a cob, or the technical term is a roller, but a lot of people call them cobs because they kind of reminded them of a corn cob. A cob has the pins on it and that open a pallet valve, and when you crank it, there's a bellows underneath that create a vacuum in the reed chamber, and just like the other organette, the air passes through and passes a reed and produces a sound, and it sounds like this. The way this operates is it actually takes 3 revolutions to play one song, and it's actually on a little bit of a spiral. So you notice it jumped back to get to that starting position after the 3rd revolution. And you can kind of hear a little bit of a warble in this. The bellows do need to be reconditioned, and basically the only thing that's really been done with this is that, or recently anyway, is that Wes Kopp was able to spruce up the outside a little bit, but as far as that goes, you know, the innards are basically, you know, the original stuff. You know, I know that you know, there are some things that on these, you know, they do, you know, wear out and you know, become brittle. So that's like one of the things that happens with bellows type of instruments. So these are 2 examples of organettes. Today we're going to be talking about the phonograph, gramophone, whatever you want to call it. It was basically invented in 1877 by Thomas Edison, who you also may have known to invent a couple other things. He still holds a patent, or he holds the record for the most number of individual patents at 1,099 patents for him. You know, everything like from phonographs and electricity, you know, light bulbs and that sort of stuff. So he's a very well-known inventor, and he created the original ones were a tin foil type phonograph, and then later developed a cylinder record player, or cylinder phonograph. And this is basically one song. This is actually an Edison Amberola record cylinder, and it would play a 4-minute song. But this fireside phonograph is from that transition period from around 1908 until 1915 or 16, when they were transitioning from a 2-minute wax cylinder to the 4-minute Amberola cylinders in direct competition with Victor, which we'll get into a little bit later. And so this fireside you know, plays the record, the recording by tracing a groove that has various bumps in it, which are then translated by a stylus onto a diaphragm, which produces a sound, and then the sound is amplified through a horn to basically play it back at a volume that you can understand. So and this one has a gear ratio change, and also the stylus change to go from the 2-minute to a 4-minute cylinder. So we'll play a little bit of a. And this Morning Glory horn is kind of what we might consider the original subwoofer, making a bigger sound. Originally they would have come with a 2-piece 10-inch horn, but this is obviously a lot bigger than that. So if you were at your local phonograph dealership, which actually happen to be a lot of times like jewelry stores, hardware stores would sell phonographs and that sort of thing, they would have these aftermarket horns that you could replace the original horn with. But the Morning Glory horn is a little bit on the big side for this the fireside. Typically they would have had them on like a Standard or a Triumph horn, and the fireside was one of the last ones before they started going in the internal horn configuration. So that's kind of what the Edison cylinder phonograph sounds like. And I guess one of the things that you hear are not so much anymore, but there's an expression called saying put a sock in it, and that comes from the phonograph era where they would dampen the sound somehow by putting a sock or some other material in the horn just to create a little less sound. At the same time Edison was really kind of coming up with the cylinder phonograph, Emil Berliner was coming up with a disc format of a recording device, and that flat disc, the Victor recording or Victor talking machines came up with, or they started selling them a lot, and so then and here's an example of a later Victor record, and it's a lateral cut. So those are going side to side, whereas the Edison cylinders were going up and down, or hill and dale method of cutting, or vertical cut records. And so with the Victor records, they have this flat platform, and they started selling a lot more than the cylinders, which were easily broken and were really big and bulky compared to the flat discs. And so eventually Edison relented and started to make his own diamond discs. Diamond because of the stylus that is used to, the needle that is used to reproduce the sound it has a diamond tip on it, so it doesn't wear out. Whereas the Victor records and that sort of thing, they would have a steel needle that you'll use one time for each record. But Edison said that if I'm going to make a disc, I'm going to make one that isn't, it's like indestructible, and it's going to maintain its flatness, because one of the problems with the Victor is they tended to warp, and so the Edison ones are made out of a lacquer top and bottom and plate on both sides. The original Victors only had it on one side, and then also has a fiber core, a formaldehyde mix pressed in together to create this rather thick disc, but it was going to play absolutely flat, and it's always at 80 RPMs, and the sound on these was superior to the Victors at the time. But if you play an Edison record with a steel needle, you basically ruin the record. In the fall of 2013, Edison factory that made all the cabinetry had a fire, and so it burned up all of his inventory, but they still had a bunch of orders. So they decided to contract out with with other woodworking companies, and one of them was the Brunswick bulk colander company out of Chicago. They had a factory in Dubuque, and which actually they made bar fronts or bars and billiards and all sorts of large woodwork type of stuff, so they got a contract in 1914 to create cabinets for Edison, and by 1916 they're like, we're doing the bulk of the work. All we need is a motor to create our own phonographs. And so in 1916 they started making their own phonographs, and by 1920, which this model is from about, they were basically the number 2 phonograph company in the world, just behind Victor. Definitely far exceeding Edison's own capabilities or demand. So I'll give you a listen to this one. This one has an internal horn, and you can see the internal horn here. This covering on the front isn't authentic. It's been replaced at some point. But it was typical that they would put in some sort of floral design on them. But you can see in here that, this is really too loud for me, so I'm going to turn it down. There's an internal dampener, so I can actually turn down the sound. And it's they call this a wooden oval horn that gives a better sound. They also have a large reproducer on the side. And the beauty of the Brunswick is that they said that they could play any song or any record from any manufacturer. So they could play the Victor records, they could play the Edison records, they could play the Pathé records. And so in order to switch from the lateral Victor records, which are going side to side, to an Edison record, you have to change how that diaphragm is going, because the needle is vibrating this diaphragm in here that's producing the sound side to side. And in order to change it, all you do is switch it over, and now it's pointing on this other diamond stylus. And so now we can listen to something that's, I don't know which one this is, but it's probably not going to sound that great, but. And Edison, he was actually hard of hearing, just like Beethoven, and so later on, basically any of the records that any recording that came from Edison, he had to personally approve, and he approved things that he remembered from his childhood, if it sounded like a melody that was from his childhood. And things that he thought sounded nice. So there's a lot more classical type music, and that sort of thing. But towards the end, they're like, as long as it has a good beat, not really necessarily beat, but good melody with it. He can't really hear the lyrics, so it doesn't really matter that much. So there's one example, I think, that has like teeth marks where he would bite down on this, or just have his teeth resting on the side of the phonograph to hear the music, that way. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, Rollo, I know my dad found this in the hotel, one of the outbuildings at Rollo Jamison Museum, and it's a all the rooms are really small and really compact, and it just like it was stuffed full of whatever. And so he found this in the corner, and he's like, well, it looks like it's all there, complete, and so he just cranked it up, and there was a record on it, and it played beautifully. Just something that was at the time 70, 80 years old, and stored in basically a shed, outdoor shed, and it hadn't been used for years, and it still plays nicely. We could replace the diaphragm, and to have it better, and repack the spring motor that's in it. As I said, none of this stuff is electrically powered or anything like that. It's all based on spring motors, so that's why you have to have a wind-up, the wind-up phonograph. But it still plays and still sounds relatively decent. So if you look at the late 1800s, early 1900s, it's really changing from an agricultural based economy to more of a consumer grade economy, and Sears and Roebuck really played a big role in distributing those commercial goods to the everyday man. Like the Regina, those were sold through Sears, but like something like the bigger ones, those still would have been like a fairly well-off person to purchase something like that. But like the cylinder phonograph and just an upright console like this, they were Edison's idea in 1890 was to have a cylinder phonograph in every home in America, and definitely by the 1900s, mid 19 teens, that was pretty much a reality. I mean, there was maybe a quarter, 75% of households had their own phonograph of some sort. And that was shortly before radios took off, and then once radios took off, it's just like you not only had one radio, but you had multiple radios in the house as well. But as far as a phonograph goes, this was the primary entertainment for people that for many years. Before that, I don't know if you know, like Laura Ingalls Wilder's book, where Pa would play the fiddle, and that was the entertainment that they had. And there's, we have a number of accordions, and we also have like a violin here, and other musical instruments, guitars and that sort of thing, and reed organs. Actually, there were more reed organs in late 1800s than there were pianos. And pianos kind of started taking over that play any music type of thing in the right at the turn of the century. But if you didn't know how to play those instruments, what do? You get a phonograph, so those were definitely sold thousands, and really there was a huge boom right after World War II or World War I, the Great War, where you saw just hundreds and hundreds of manufacturers of these phonographs. There's two things. There's patent restrictions before that, limited who could do stuff, but also the the economy really picked up right after World War I to for several years until it tanked, with the Great Depression. But during that time, this was like kind of your personal entertainment, your home stereo system. So instead of a TV, you would have something like this, and you would go down to the your five and dime store or local hardware store and pick out a record, at 75 cents a piece, and that was like your spending money for the week, and then you take it home and play it. So.